In 1968, my father was diagnosed with cancer. If the truth be known, it was probably terminal when it was diagnosed. But my mother and the doctor she worked for decided not to tell my father, or anybody else for that matter. They were afraid that he would give up. And so we went about life as normal. Well, not quite. For it seemed in those days that anything my dad expressed a desire for or anything he liked to do, we did. My dad loved to fish. He and my mom reminisced about the days before they got me when they would spend a week or two in Hudson Bay in Canada doing nothing but fishing. And so for his birthday, we got him a brand new fishing outfit. Rod and reel, one of those new Zebcos with a push button. Lots of lures, new tackle box, hip waders. He was set. What I didn't realize was what that really meant for the rest of us. For as soon as summer rolled around, it meant every night we would go fishing for what seemed to be hours on end until the darkness got too deep. We didn't catch much, but that didn't seem to bother my dad. He was happy. And I guess that's what it really was all about. I learned in those days to really dislike fishing. It was only complicated when, after my dad died, my Uncle Mart decided that he would step up and offer himself as a fatherly role model. And the first thing he did was take us fishing on the first day of fishing season. It snowed. To my recollection, that was the last time I touched a fishing pole. I don't like fishing. And so when Jesus talks about fishing for people, follow me and I will make you fishers of people, says Jesus to James and John and Peter. It doesn't exactly get me terribly excited, which is really difficult as one who has been called as an evangelist not to get excited about fishing for people. It's one of the great images that we use to talk about evangelism. Well, what does it really mean? I mean, think about it. What do you do with the fish after you catch them? Do you eat them? When I think about it, much of our evangelism is trying to get people into church. And once we get them in church, we throw them in to the frying pan. We get them involved in as much as we can. And it's no wonder that many of them just burn out. Do we eat them? Or do we get to choose? Which are the ones we throw back? Are there keepers? Are there those we just as soon not have? Do we make those kinds of distinctions? Do we fish to catch and release? We get all excited about the work of evangelism, but not the work of incorporating, making them feel welcome. What's it mean to fish for people? Yeah, the problem is we don't really get a glimpse of the disciples actually doing that, fishing for people. So, what's it look like? What's it mean for us? Well, the disciples don't appear to be fishing for people. If we follow Jesus, what it seems to mean, at least as I read Mark's gospel, is that we are about the work of healing. For in the very next episode, Jesus begins a healing ministry in his words, in his actions. He heals the physically ill. He heals those possessed. He heals spiritually. He heals community-wide. For in each of those acts of healing, Jesus brings those he heals not only to health, but back into the community. Jesus enters the world in a time when Judaism had become obsessed with keeping the Torah, the law. And it had become a practice that separated, that divided the people. What did it mean to be a good Jew versus those Gentiles, those non-Jews out there? It divided people by gender. Some were clean, some were not. It divided on physical abilities. If you were sick, you were out. If you were healthy, you were in. It divided on ethnicity. It divided on practice. Whether you kept a kosher kitchen or not. If you ate the right foods. It divided on keeping Sabbath laws. It divided people and excluded them. And what Jesus does is he plays footloose and fancy free in the midst of all these laws and regulations and brings healing. Healing to all that would separate one from another and restores them to community. It's no wonder he gets in trouble with the religious leaders of the day. They like that idea of who's in, who's out, who's a keeper, and who do you throw back or throw out in most cases. Well, what does that look like? What's that look like for us? For me, it was a great shock when I began my work with the National Church. It forced me out of what I didn't even realize I had become, and that was very parochial, very local. What we used to call growing up the holler attitude. You know, those folks up in the holler, they didn't seem to know anything about the rest of the world. Suddenly this big world opened up, and I was forced to rethink so many of my predilections, my stereotypes, my prejudices. And it was done so through individuals. I learned how to sing in Spanish from Jaime. In fact, there are still hymns in our hymnal where we have both English and Spanish versions, and I find the Spanish version easier to sing, especially since I always hear Jaime in my ear. I listened to Carlton's painful story about how to explain to his son what it meant when he found in the men's bathroom, scrawled on the wall, all N-word should die. Or to hear the pain and to remember the stories growing up with the Native Americans, the indigenous people. Gordon taught me so much in those days about what it means to be the forgotten people. And Donna taught me what it was like to have a loving and healthy relationship with another woman. And then my dear friend Har, I wept with him as he worried about his sister and her family in Gaza. My life will never be the same. It has been blessed and stretched, but in the end blessed. Perhaps that's what it means to be fishers of people, to put ourselves out there and dare to be caught in God's grace in a world that is bigger than our immediate sphere, that we may know the richness of this wonderful tapestry that God calls creation.